Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to take you through this Dresden flower petal pattern. It's a foundation paper piece pattern that I created and it's available on my Etsy shop. Now each pattern is going to create a 6-inch finished quadrant of a flower. And if you use 4 of the quadrants, you'll get a complete flower. And if you put more than one flower together, you'll end up with this secondary star in the middle. Now here's a little coloring sheet that you can use to try out some ideas. You can also use that very first page to try out some ideas. The pattern itself only has 3 parts, A, B, and C. The A piece goes in the middle, and it is the piece that you will need to think about if you want to create that secondary star pattern. And on this very last page of the pattern, I highlighted the light color and the 2 dark colors around it. And going back to the sample page, you can see that that light, which is piece A8 on section A, creates that star in the middle. And if you surround it with dark, they don't exactly match up, but it does kind of create that cool secondary star. Well, I have a lot of scraps to use up, so I thought I would try this first in a scrappy way, although I did want the petals of the flower to be sort of unified, so I picked a green and a purple and a pink for the flower petals. And I had a very little bit left of this bright yellow, and I thought, well, I'll make that my A8 piece, and that will be my star. Now my first step in doing a foundation paper piece pattern is cutting apart the sections and then cutting out fabric to go with each piece on the section. However, the pieces, besides the petals, are so small I'm just grabbing from my scrap pile. I'm not pre-cutting anything but this yellow for the piece A8. Okay, to put this flower together, I'm going to take my piece A first. I am going to put my green that I'm using for the petal wrong side up. And I'm going to find a little piece that's big enough to cover piece A2, and I double check that by placing it wrong side up on the pattern. Now what I've got to do, which is a little tricky, is line these up on the back, and I need these 2 fabrics to be right sides together. I need a 1/4 inch to overlap the line between piece 1 and piece 2. If you're using light fabrics, a lamp will be your best friend here, but in my case I've got some dark fabrics I can't really see, but I can fold down on the line and I can see I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance there. I'm going to immediately take this to the sewing machine and stitch the line between piece 1 and piece 2. I'm going to stitch a couple stitches before and a couple stitches after the line. And one of my tips in the description, use a 1.8 stitch length or less. Now it's a little tedious, but I do trim the thread after sewing on each additional piece. Now I'm going to fold this pattern down on that line I just stitched. Now I can take my scissors and trim both fabrics back to a little bit less than 1/4 inch. Then I will flip this over and I will press that seam open and press it flat. Now I'm going to keep going around this petal, adding additional pieces in the number order. For every piece I add, I'm going to place it right sides together with the back of the piece. I'm going to fold down on that seam line, make sure that I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to stitch it. Then I will fold the paper down on the seam line. Then I will trim away the excess down to a little less than 1/4 of an inch. Then I will take it to the iron and press that seam open and flat. If you're going to try to make this star pattern, I would recommend you circle that piece A8 on your pattern so that when you get to it, you'll remember that that is going to create that star for you. So here you see I'm adding that piece of yellow in the same way, stitching on the line, folding the line down, trimming away excess, and then pressing it flat and open. I decided to do this Dresden petal in a 2-color choice. I'm using green for the petal and white for everything else with no secondary star pattern. And again, I'm stitching on the line, folding back on the line to trim away excess, and then pressing the seam open. And I wanted to add one more piece to this green and white. I just want to show how a lamp can come in handy if you're using light colored fabrics. You can see that fabric right through the paper and know that it's overlapping your stitch line. One other foundation paper piecing tip: if you're using a white background fabric, and even if you're using colorful batiks, they don't have a right or a wrong side, so it's a lot easier to put these pieces together. Here is one of the scrappy petals, all done, but it's not trimmed yet. Now before trimming, I wanted to explain how these patterns work. We're going to be cutting and trimming on the dotted line, which is our seam allowance, and I wanted to point out there are angles on some of these corners. It is important to cut on those angles. That's going to help us with lining up the pieces later to stitch together. Once I had all the scrappy pieces trimmed, I wanted to lay these out and decide if I like this look or not. This first layout shows how these big blocks will look when they come together with the stars together. I do like the star, and I like that dark green petal in the middle. I don't really like the rest of the block that much. Now turning this around so we can see how the big blocks will look with the petal on the inside, it's completely different. And as I said, I really am not too excited about how these petals look. I don't think there's enough contrast, and I didn't pay enough attention to volume, which simply means how something appears light or dark. So let's talk about that. For all these photos, I've got the original and then I've got a copy in a black and white colorway, just so you can kind of see how that looks. You can see the lights popping, the darks popping. Now here on this block with the star in the middle, you can see when it goes to black and white, we've got this great looking star, but we have completely lost those two outer petals. They just totally blend into those scrap fabrics that I used. Now here's a look at these pieces turned with the petals to the inside, and then in the black and white, it would have been better to use light volume on the petals and dark on the scraps, or vice versa. Either way would work, just to get enough contrast between the petals. And last, here is a look at a block in just 2 colors. You get the petals, but you don't get the star. Okay, let's talk about putting these 3 pieces together into one quadrant. So we've got our A in the middle and then B and C on either side. So you can see these angled edges, those are going to assist us in lining up these 2 pieces so we get a nice straight edge. Now I'm using my thumbnail and my fingernail to kind of hold that in place, opening it up, and you can see that straight edge is going to be working out just fine for the edge of the block. When I'm doing complex paper piecing, I will use clips to hold these in place, make sure everything lines up before I take it to the sewing machine. Now this pattern is pretty easy, so I am going to remove all the paper before I stitch these pieces together. On complex patterns, I leave that paper on until I stitch a seam. Next, I will stitch piece A to piece B, and then I will add on piece C to complete this quadrant. Once you have 4 of these quadrants done, you simply sew them together in your one big Dresden flower block. Now, since this block didn't turn out as one of my favorites, I am actually going to use it as the centerpiece for a quilt. And then imagine, if you will, a light colored border around the outside of it, and then another border that includes light colored fabric with some of these crazy scrappy blocks. And I think by doing that, I can enlarge this into at least a lap-size quilt with this crazy flower that I really don't care for that much. I think when I get it finished in the way I'm thinking of, it's going to be lovely. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a little something and had a little fun, and I hope to see you back again real soon.